Hey Canucks fans, welcome to Clay's Canucks commentary for Tuesday, January the 23rd. Tonight the Canucks return to action at Rogers Arena as they host the Los Angeles Kings. And if it feels like the Canucks haven't been at home for a while, it's because the Canucks haven't played at home for a while. Their last game was January 2nd, and that was a 5-0 loss to another California team, the Anaheim Ducks. I'll be going to tonight's game with my parish priest, Father Mark, a good friend of mine. We may or may not say a quick prayer before the game, but hey, we look forward to having a really good time. Today, for today's video, I want to talk about uncertainty. And there's three issues revolving around the Canucks right now that are looming with uncertainty. And the first one is the Sedins, the future of the Sedins. We're hearing it on all the TV stations and all the radio stations because the Canucks came out of their 5-day break, and you looked at their schedule, and they only had 37 games left. And then you thought to yourself, wait a sec, if this is the Sedins' last season, this is technically their farewell tour, the last half of the season, less than 40 games left to really appreciate them. Now, I think common sentiment is that the Sedins will come back for at least one more year, and then it becomes, well, how much do you pay them for that year? You don't want to, lowball them and insult them. I've heard things about $3.5 million, but despite that's a lot of money for me or for any of us, I don't know if any of us would come to work for next year at half of our salary. So maybe it settles in the $4.5 to $5 million range. That's what I see, a number close to $4.5 million for 1 year, so $9 million total, and that makes sense to me. It's a reduction, but it's not a reduction so much that it's half of their salary for this year. So that's the first thing that we're uncertain about. Are the Sedins coming back? And if not, then we better appreciate them for the next 35 games. And if so, what kind of role, how much money will they take, how long is the contract, so on and so forth. So that's number one. The second thing that's uncertainty, so that's on the ice, is off the ice. It's the future of management, and in particular Jim Benning. We know that he's had 3 years, his 3-year contract is coming up in a few months, and we don't know what the extension talks have been, if there have been any, but one thing we do know is that there is nothing announced so far. There's no contract in place. So that's a funky situation heading into both the trade deadline, of course, and then if he does come back, then they'll probably announce it soon. If he doesn't come back, then they'll need a new GM in before, obviously, the draft and free agency in June and July 1, respectively. A lot of talk about Ken Holland. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I admittedly have to do a bit more research, but it's just really interesting that there's this uncertainty here, and then it'll come into the trade deadline in a few weeks, and how is that going to affect things? Does it weaken the Canucks' position when it comes to bargaining and trading when we don't have a GM in place, either a lame duck GM, or there's uncertainty around the future of this current GM. So that's number two. And number three, not as big as the Sedin issue or the GM issue, is there's uncertainty around the trade deadline, especially around Thomas Vanek. Now, we tend to think that Gudbranson will be traded, and we hope that the Canucks have a good trade deadline. 2 years ago, they didn't, when they had Radim Verbata and Dan Hamhuis still on their roster the day after the trade deadline, and they lost both of those guys for free in the summer. Last year was a lot better. They traded Burrows for Jonathan Dahlen. They traded Yannick Hansen for Nikolai Goldobin, and yes, those two guys haven't made impact on the Canucks roster yet, but there's certainly potential for both of them in the years to come. So we're excited. So last year, 2 years ago, was a loss at the trade deadline. Last year was a win. What's going to happen this year? Well, if you look at the trend of two players, it's probably Gudbranson and Vanek are the two guys you're looking at. Gudbranson, I think everyone knows he'll be the one traded. But what about Thomas Vanek? I think when we signed him for the 1-year free agent contract in the summer, everyone thought that, yeah, this is one and done. Let's flip him at the trade deadline for some assets. As he's played a really good season, as he's piled up the points, as he's mentored guys like Brock Besser, there's a growing sentiment, not a huge, but a sentiment of thought that says maybe we should keep him, especially if the Sedins don't come back. You need leadership, you need mentorship in the room. I still think that's the wrong way to go. It's a nice story that he's doing well, but there's no guarantee that he is going to sign with us after his contract's done. So we could still end up losing him for nothing. So conventional wisdom says, as good as it is, as sentimental as you might feel towards Vanek, is to indeed move him at the trade deadline for at least one draft pick, or maybe a second or third round draft pick, and then add it to our prospect pool, so to speak. So those three things: what are the Sedins going to do? What's Jim Benning going to do? What are the Canucks going to do with Jim Benning? And what's our trade deadline going to look like? Will it be a hit for our team. And lastly, obviously the Canucks fans are very, very intrigued by it. I put a poll up last week saying, of these three things, which one would get you more excited? Besser winning the Calder, a strong trade deadline for the team, a win on the trade deadline, or the Canucks making the playoffs kind of facetiously. And the first two, understandably, were the closest, and 51% said a strong trade deadline, followed by 43% Brock winning the Calder, and then only 43, and only 6% saying making the playoffs. So it was split, but still the growing sentiment, at least for those 300 people that voted on my Twitter poll, are saying we need to have a strong trade deadline. So that's what I think is facing the Canucks. That's the uncertainty facing the Canucks for the last 35 games of the season. Sedins, Benning, and the trade deadline. What do you think? What are you nervous about? Are there other issues that I forgot to talk about? Or any of those three issues not an issue for you? Leave a comment below. I'd love to read what you think. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. Enjoy the game tonight. I'll be enjoying the game at the arena. I'll check in with you in a couple of days. God bless, and go Canucks go.